Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you. I am here on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nation, and I want to just brief British Columbians on some changes that will take place as we go into the long weekend here in British Columbia and, of course, across Canada and indeed around the world, where we have faith-based organizations celebrating Passover, celebrating Easter. Ramadan's about to begin. Vaisakhi is just around the corner. Bonnie Henry and I and Adrian Dix spoke with 130 faith leaders yesterday to talk to them about how best to deal with this time when many faith groups are coming together. It's also a time, I think, when people look towards the outdoors. It's going to be a spectacularly wonderful weekend weather-wise, and all the more reason for us to take stock of where we are with our fight against the COVID-19 virus, and to reassert the importance of us staying the course and abiding by the directions that Dr. Henry has been giving for the past number of weeks. One of the issues that I wanted to talk about specifically is the return of snowbirds and the arrival of repatriation flights of Canadians who have been for the past number of weeks in other countries, other jurisdictions where COVID-19 regulations may not be as stringent as they are here. And although we welcome home all of those travelers, we also are asking them to join with all of us in the battle that we've been waging together over the past number of weeks. We've been staying home. We've been giving up some of our liberties in the interest of the benefit to the greater good. And as people return to British Columbia, we have an expectation that they will follow suit. So when people arrive at the Vancouver International Airport, they will be required to have a self-isolation plan. Now, this self-isolation plan is not just a suggestion, it is a directive from the Public Health Office. It also is consistent with the Quarantine Act that has been put in place by the federal government, and it is mandatory for those coming back to British Columbia to have a plan. And we're going to be taking steps with the federal government to ensure that travelers coming back to Canada, whether they be at land crossings, whether they be at Vancouver International Airport, that they will be met by BC officials, they'll be met by federal officials, and they will be required to explain in detail with forms that will be provided on flight, forms that are also available on the web, to ensure that these legal documents are completed upon arrival and that a plan has been put in place. I believe this is a reasonable expectation, as you know, all of you who are listening and all of those across British Columbia who are working very hard to bend the curve. We have an expectation that those that have been away, as grateful as they are, I'm sure, to be back in British Columbia, they have to pick up the ball and carry it just as we all have. That plan must be approved by BC officials, and if there is not a self-isolation plan, a quarantine site will be prepared and made available to those individuals until they can get themselves together. This has been a plan that has been agreed to by the federal government. They will be joining us next week comprehensively, but they're not quite ready yet. And I don't make that as a criticism. I just say that we are ready to go. We have been for some time. We have more resources on the ground in British Columbia, obviously, than the federal government does. I've spoken regularly with Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, as well as with the Prime Minister and other premiers across the country. And we need to make sure that all of the work that Canadians have been doing is not erased by a group of people who may come back and not have the same level of perseverance that British Columbians have had to this point in time. I want to reinforce that in order for all of us to stay safe, in order for us to protect those frontline workers, those healthcare workers that are putting their lives on the line to protect British Columbians, we need to flatten the curve. We need to listen to the directives that we have received daily for weeks and weeks from Dr. Henry and Minister Dix, that we need to ensure that we're self-isolating if we're coming back from a jurisdiction that has COVID-19 in place and could be a risk to fellow citizens. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And I also advise I have made an exemption. I think some of you have picked this up. an exemption to the essential service list. I've added the Easter Bunny, so there is no fear. I've got a couple of letters from youngsters concerned that Easter could be disrupted by COVID-19. I have also a list of suggestions for the Easter Bunny about washing paws, about ensuring that there is some safe physical distancing when eggs are being distributed around British Columbia. But Easter Bunny will be here on the weekend, kids. You can rest easy with that, and I'll ask Jen for some questions. There was, for example, a repatriation flight that arrived last weekend. I sent one of my colleagues, Parliamentary Secretary Ravi Kahlon, who will be coordinating volunteers to make sure that we have translation services at the airport. YVR has been very good. I've spoken with the CEO there and his team. We need to make sure we're providing as seamless a transition for those who are returning, whether they're coming from Arizona or Florida or from other parts of the world, that they have the tools they need to achieve the objectives that we want to see. We have been raising this with the federal government for some time, and I don't want to characterize this as a criticism, Vaughn, because we are all making this up as we go. And we identified this as a problem early on. I'm pleased that tomorrow will be the last day for flights originating in the U.S. to arrive in either Victoria or Kelowna. And the only destination now for inbound passengers outside of Canada will be YVR. So our ability to manage that has greatly improved. Similarly, I want to make sure that on land crossings, this weekend we'll have 4 of the 8 land crossings staffed by BC officials to work with Border Service Agency people to ensure that we're making this as seamless as possible. We're not assuming first and foremost people are going to be bad actors. We want to make sure that we can help them be good actors by giving them the tools that they will need and acknowledging to them that coming back to Canada and then stopping at the golf course to hit a bucket of balls and maybe going to pick up some groceries and stopping at a buddy's place is not self-isolation. So some of these things seem self-evident to those of us who have been doing this for the past number of weeks, but it's not necessarily self-evident to those who are arriving back into Canada. Grateful to be back here, to be sure. We want to make sure they have all the tools they need to make sure that our success is not diminished.
Next up, we have Rob Buffum.
Oh, hi, Premier. I'm wondering about enforcement of this new policy. If somebody sees somebody violating these things or has concerns, who should they turn to for enforcement? Would that be the police empowered? Would that be a bylaw officer? How does that work?
Well, we certainly want to. We've been working through Minister Farnworth and public safety officials to empower bylaw officers and others, and that's a work in progress as well, Rob. This all is a work in progress. But our expectation is that if citizens see other fellow citizens acting badly, if they know they've come back from abroad and are not self-isolating, you want to approach them and encourage them to get back into their house or back into their place of isolation. And if that's unsuccessful, I think you should contact authorities, whether it be the Public Health Office, where these directives originated, or local law enforcement. There is a website that goes live today. I regrettably don't have that in front of me, but we'll get Dr. Henry and Adrian will perhaps have that at their briefing later today. What we're saying to people coming back to Canada is welcome. It's good to see you again. This is what we've been doing while you were away. We've been working as a province collectively to bend the curve on the COVID-19 virus, and we have demonstrable evidence that we have been making progress. We are far from out of the woods. Dr. Henry's been very clear on that, but we have made progress, particularly measured against other provinces across the country. I've been engaged for weeks now in discussions with fellow premiers, with federal officials. My colleagues in cabinet have been talking to their opposite numbers as we try to craft a pan-Canadian approach to this challenge. And every time we run into an obstacle, we look at problem solving. Chrystia Freeland and I are in regular contact several times a day. I find a problem, I work with my ministers, we present it to the federal government, and we work together to find that solution. And I think those coming back who have been away for a period of time need to celebrate with us the success that we've seen, but they need to then join with us to continue going through these next number of weeks that are so critically important to our success. There will be materials available. They will be available prior to getting on the flight. If anyone has traveled internationally, you'll know that Immigration Canada and Customs give you a form to fill out before you can leave the airport. This is not unlike that situation. We want everyone to tell us what their plan is. We'll be monitoring that, and I've asked Parliamentary Secretary Ravi Kahlon to work, as he was formerly the Parliamentary Secretary for Multiculturalism. We want to make sure we have translation services at the airport. This is not something that the airport traditionally does, but this is what good neighbors do. We want to make sure that those who may be challenged by English as a first language, or English as a second language rather, that they're not intimidated by the forms to the point that they don't fill them out correctly. This is really important that everybody understand this is not optional. This is not a suggestion. These are part of the directives that Dr. Henry's been putting in place to ensure that we have volunteers that are ready. That's what Parliamentary Secretary Kahlon is working on right now, to find ways that we can get people from the airport. If you're symptomatic, you're not going to be leaving the airport. This is purely for people who come back, they have no symptoms, they feel fine. We still need to have the isolation plan. So if you have the plan, you're directed to get to that place where you're going to isolate and do so. With respect to quarantine sites, that's not information that I have available to me, but that again is something in consultation with the federal government we're working on to ensure that if you don't have a plan, we have a place for you to go till you figure it out. And if you don't have it figured out, you'll stay there for 14 days. Well, we certainly can access apps and location detectors on telephones. We're going to be doing this on a personal basis to start with, as we start developing this program over the next week to 10 days. With the federal government, we'll have more information on how that management will take place. I felt it was important to get out of the gate now. There's going to be a repatriation flight later in the week. The borders, of course, are going to be seeing an increased amount of traffic coming back from the United States as snowbirds start to make their way back to British Columbia. And so we wanted to make sure that the public knew today that there is going to be a requirement of a plan, and they should start contemplating that. The details are going to be worked out as the federal government gets to a place where they can join us. And again, I want to reiterate, they are on the same page as we are. Well, I shouldn't say that. We're in the same book. They're a page or two behind us, but I'm not bothered by that, nor are they. It's just easier for us to implement because we're on the ground. We're British Columbians. Ottawa needs to redeploy resources across the country. The success we have here will hopefully be duplicated in Toronto and Montreal. That's the plan, as Minister Freeland has laid out to me. And again, I'll leave it to them to deal with those issues, but I don't want anyone to come away from this assuming that I'm not satisfied with the level of cooperation, because I am quite satisfied. We needed to make it abundantly clear that this was a challenge. Health officials shared that challenge. The people in Ottawa get it, and we're working on a solution.